So I just thought of something I'd love to share and talk about, and that is I grew up in upstate New York, out in a little town called Pittsford, and it's a suburb of Rochester. My dad was a Kodak executive for his whole career, and Kodak's headquarters was in Rochester. And we had my father's uncle, which is my great uncle George, lived in a house on Lake Cayuga. Now, Lake Cayuga is in upstate New York, and it's one of the Finger Lakes. It's one of the bigger ones. At the very end of the lake is it's a city called Ithaca, New York, and it's known for, it is the home of Cornell University, an Ivy League school, and also Ithaca College, and it is right now the home of my sisters, Annie and Margaret, and my oldest brother, Tad. And they all live in Ithaca. And that is, about a 40-minute drive, I would guess, from where Uncle George's lake house was on Lake Cayuga. It was in a little town or village, I don't know which it was, but it was called Levana, Levana, Levana. And it was, let me tell you something, for a kid or an adult, but especially for a kid, it was a fascinating place. It was about an hour drive from home, so we would spend lots of weekends there, certainly in the summer. And when Dad would take a vacation, he would inevitably take the vacation as 1 or 2 weeks just staying there. It was a beautiful lake house, and Lake Cayuga had good fishing. My dad loved to fish. But my Uncle George lived there by himself. And Uncle George was, to me, a man of few words. He was very tall, very thin. To me, he seemed ancient. I'm going to guess my earliest memories of him, he was probably in his 70s then, but seemed older. And I remember he used to call me old timer. And Uncle George was very particular about his stuff, right? And when I say his stuff, we're talking about, it wasn't just the house. There was a lot there. There was the main house, which I think originally was fairly small, but there was what we called the summer wing was added on to it. And I'd have to guess my sister Annie will correct me on all my misinformation in this video, but I think in the summer wing there were at least 4 or 5 bedrooms up there. And there was the ketchup factory. Yes, you heard me correctly. The ketchup factory. Around the turn of the century, my family was in the ketchup business. They made ketchup. And the factory, which looked like a big red barn, was still there, obviously not making ketchup. I think the ketchup business shut down before 1920. But the structure was still there, and it was like the little lawnmower tractor was there, and all my Uncle George's, all his tools and things. And there was a second floor that I was forbidden to go on the second floor because it was falling apart, and there were holes in the floor, and little boys could fall through. So I was forbidden to go to the second floor of the factory. So, of course, immediately I went to the second floor of the factory every chance I got. And I was totally fascinated with the holes in the floor, and the possibility that I would fall through and die just made it more exciting. There were also several other buildings, small storage buildings, and I have no idea what they were used for, but one of them I remember was just filled with feral cats. I was fascinated by that. And of course there was a big cement dock, and as the years went by, this cement dock crumbled and deteriorated more and more as the years went by. But back in the house, there were fascinating things in the house. There was a room with 2 giant pianos, right, in it, and both of them are totally out of tune, not tuned in years and years. Why there were two pianos in that room, I have no idea. There was, this is a silly thing to remember, but I was fascinated about it. There was a mechanical card shuffler. Like, there was a cabinet that had games and decks of cards, but there was also a device you put a deck of cards in and you crank it and it would shuffle the cards. I remember. And this speaks to family history. On many of the walls, in addition to very scary looking busts and heads of deer hanging from the walls, were huge black and white photographs of the moon. I mean, super detailed black and white photographs of the moon. Why? And I'll tell you why. Because a relative, and Annie will, I hope, will jump into the comments and correct everything, but I believe he was my great grandfather. He, among other things in his life, was an astrophotographer. He invented a device that would work in conjunction with a time exposure camera. It was a mechanical device that would move the camera over time, and I assume in coordination with the relative position of the moon in the earth, to get these very detailed pictures of the moon. And he was married to a woman that was a doctor, and the way the story goes is a woman could not be licensed as a physician even though she had the requisite education and experience. So what that meant technically was that she could not accept money for medical services. So she bartered, got goods for her services. And I cannot tell you who told me that story. I have no idea. I think it was my dad, but I don't know. Again, my sister Annie, who is the unofficial family historian, will confirm or deny this information. She'll say yes, and she'll give the correct information, or she'll say, Robert, you're out of your mind. I don't know where you hear these things. But that's what I grew up believing, and that's my story, and I'm gonna stick to it. So another fascinating thing that fascinated me as a kid is there was a cornfield, and there was a lawn in front of the house and then a cornfield, but we couldn't eat the corn. It wasn't the kind of corn that people eat, and that always confused me. It was like, there's a kind people don't eat. Well, someone said, well, the kind of corn that is, you give it to livestock to eat. I didn't see any livestock around, so that was always confusing for me. But we never got to eat any of the corn that was grown there. But we did, we would have these big meals on Sundays there. And the part of the house facing the lake had a very, very long, thin porch with a big table on it, and you could put a family of 20 at this table. And I have memories of many Sunday afternoon dinners at that big long table overlooking the lake, and how good the New York fresh corn, not from the house, they got it somewhere else, they got it from a cornfield of people corn. And my dad would do steaks, and the neighbors, the Taylors, they were the next house over, the Taylors seemed to me like part of the family, but they weren't technically related to us, but they were family to us just the same. They had a beautiful vegetable garden, and I remember the taste of this, peas that were so fresh that they were picked the same day you ate them. And God, it just tasted so good. I can remember sitting with my sisters out in front, and I had the job of shucking the corn. And I have really fond memories of that. And I also remember a water pump that, with a big handle on it, and you pump it, and the water, fresh well water, would come out. It was an exciting place. I think the last thing that I remember that I thought was really cool, there were old abandoned railroad tracks that ran through the property and also ran through, it looked like a little way station or something, or a mini train station. It was a building that the tracks either ran through or right beside, and the building was abandoned and falling apart, but it was a really cool place to go, and I'm sure I was warned not to go there because it was too dangerous, which would get me there with great regularity. I would wander off as a little boy, maybe 5 years old. I would just wander away. My family did not worry about me wandering away for one very specific reason, and that reason had a name, and the name was Shep. Shep was a stray German shepherd that followed my sister home one day and never left. And I was a little tiny baby when Shep followed my sister home, and this giant white, pure white German shepherd who my dad, I'm sure it was my dad that decided to call him Shep. That would be like my dad. This giant animal imprinted himself on me, and with family, he was the most gentle, kindest dog in the world. If you were a stranger, be friggin' careful. If you were a stranger in some kind of uniform, be really, 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 really careful. And God forbid, if you were a stranger that looked like you might be harming little baby Robert, you weren't going to survive it. So my sisters would say, every once in a while they'd be at Lavana and they go, "Where's Robert? Anyone seen Robert?" No one's seen Robert. So I was 5, they had to go look for me. But what they would look for is Shep. Shep would be visible, and they'd look down the end of the road or something, and they see Shep, and they knew, even if they couldn't see me, they knew I was there. I could be behind a tree, behind Shep, but if they saw that white dog, that's where I was. And I think Shep is the reason why it's been so important for me to have a dog every day of my adult life. And that's why I have Dottie. Where's Dottie? Dottie's not here with me. Dottie didn't make the trip today, unfortunately. I left him in the care of my buddy at back at Camp Tim, and the reason is that I was gonna, if I took Dottie with me to Yuma today, I would have to have left Dottie in the car by herself. And I get it that the high was only going to be 59, but I just don't leave, even at lower temperatures, I'm just not comfortable leaving Dottie for more than a few minutes in the car by herself. I just don't want to take that risk. So I left her at home. Dad'll be home soon, Dottie. It looks like it's 5:42, and it says I will be home at 6:16, so about a half an hour. But that is my Lavana story. Oh, I keep thinking of more things. There were 2 kitchens. There was the new kitchen and the old kitchen. And the new kitchen was in sort of the newer part of the house, and it was a modern kitchen, as modern as a kitchen can be in like 1951. That's about as modern as it gets. But the old kitchen had a coal burning stove, and it had, this was fascinating, the coal room. There was a door in the back. You open the door, and there's no windows. It's totally dark, and the floor is covered with coal. was where the coal was stored for the coal burning stove, oven, whatever that thing, was. In that old kitchen was a door, and on that door was scratch marks for the heights and dates of everyone in the family. Brothers, sisters, cousins. I think the Taylors were probably on there. But the whole door was covered with the height history of the Wakeleys. And years after the house, Uncle George passed, and the family sold the house, it was first acquired by a physician from Rochester, a wealthy physician. He restored the house beautifully. I've seen pictures. I've not gone inside of it, but he preserved that door. He preserved the names and the scratch marks. What a beautiful thing to do. That honored my family. I thought of another thing too, reminiscing about Lavana. I can remember, of course, if my dad was going to take a week's vacation at Lavana, I would go along, of course. And my sister, or sisters, but this one vivid memory that I have, I think my sister Margaret and I were staying with Dad and Uncle George for a week. I'm not sure where Annie was or the boys, but it was just Margaret and me and my dad. And my dad would get up early before I got up, and he would go out in the boat and do his serious fishing. And by that I mean when he took me fishing, we had to go to the places where you could catch like a lot of little sunfish to keep me occupied, right? Because I was a little boy. I didn't have a lot of patience. So when I got up, Margaret would feed me and give me my breakfast, and then it was time for me to go fishing with my dad. And we would go down to the dock, and my Margaret would carry a big bell with her. And she would go to the dock, and she'd ring this bell, and my dad would be out fishing, and he'd hear the sound of the bell, and he knew it was time to come pick me up and take me out. I got to be with my dad in a boat fishing. Just a wonderful, wonderful memory for me. So that's my Lavana story.